It's time for Political Buzz, the television forum to discuss politics and issues of interest for all of Western New York. Now, from the WBBZ television studio at the Eastern Hills Mall, this is Political Buzz.
Hello, everybody. John DeShula with you here with our executive producer, Phil Arno, on Political Buzz. We want to welcome attorney from Underberg and Kessler, Steve Pidgeon, regular on our show. Steve, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
There is a lot to talk about. Phil and I were talking before the show that, a lot in the world of politics and pretty tough stuff coming out of Albany with Dennis Gaberzak, Assemblyman, and the seven women that came forward claiming that they were harassed. And what is your take on this very unfortunate situation, not only with what had happened, but how it played out and how he reacted to it?
Well, first off, I don't think it's over. My reaction is, at first, I think it's tragic. I'm in front of the Assemblyman and his family. His parents are terrific people, both still with us, and I'm sure it's a terrible tragedy for the family. I think that there must be some sort of compulsion or some sort of illness there, because it absolutely makes no sense that he would continue with this type of behavior when clearly he was having problems inside the office and with girl after woman after woman after woman. But the reason why I say I think it will continue is in his resignation, he really didn't take responsibility nor apologize. He said that it was mutual banter. He said that there was no, physical contact when one of the women has claimed that he, tried to force herself on her. He basically made it seem as it was one big misunderstanding. When it appears, especially now that we've seen released today videos and different stuff, that really was rising to the level of harassment in the office. So I think we probably have not heard the end of this, and it's tragic. It's unfortunate. It is maybe a good argument as to why we need some more women in elected offices. You don't see these type of scandals. Phil, you were mentioning that this isn't really a Democrat or Republican thing. We've seen this in both parties, although I can't remember the last woman office holder who was involved in one of these.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because these allegations came out right before Christmas. It was mid-December, and then there was just silence from Dennis, and then he hired a very prominent attorney, Terry Connors, to help him sort through this, and then more women came forward, and more women came forward, and I guess why wouldn't he have said something early on,
well,
or was he waiting for it to maybe blow over, and then he resigned earlier this week?
What you saw was a legal strategy, not a political strategy based trying to save the office or save the political career. When the first story hit, it was 3 women, although it made it clear that there was more coming. They referenced at least 3 other women in the initial notice of claim. So I think the legal strategy is, a lawyer will tell you, say nothing, because if anything you can say could be used against you, the old Miranda warning, can be used against you in the future. A political strategy was awful. If there was ever any idea of trying to hang on to the office, not to have to resign, to try to maintain a political career, you have to answer immediately. And the fact that there was no denial in the public's mind clearly made it look as if these allegations, were most likely true.
Now, Phil, you and I talked about these allegations of harassment, but the time from when this alleged harassment happened until the filing suit, it seemed to be an enormous amount of time.
We're talking 7 years, 6 years, 5 years.
And I think that's a lot of, many times women are reluctant to come forward. And my understanding of the situation is that many of them didn't realize till they met, would talk years later or met and ran into each other, that they had had the same experience. So that many of them felt like, well, maybe it was just something I did. Maybe this only happened to me, and they're embarrassed and they're ashamed. And I think once people started talking to each other, that's when they started reaching out to other people that had also worked there. And it's often times that when women make these allegations, they become attacked. They become open to attack. So I think it's a difficult thing to do. It's a hard thing to do against a boss. It's a hard thing to do against a public figure. And many of them at the time thought it was only happening to them. It wasn't until the most recent circumstances, which were last year and this year, where it seemed like it was several people in the office talking about it to each other. The early ones seemed more to be that it was, that they felt alone, and it was when the current people reached out to them that they realized it was continuing and that it was not going to stop. I think in the case of Christy Mazurek, she felt that, she did not like the situation she was in and quit. When she found out that there was others happening to, and it was still continuing, that's when she felt she had a duty to speak out. She didn't, in the beginning, she thought, okay, I handled it, I quit, and wouldn't necessarily be a person who would start that. But she felt she had an obligation when it continued to happen and was continuing to happen to support what everybody else had said.
Let's talk a little bit about Christy and some of the representation. There's a legal representation. I guess Johnny Destino, who's an attorney from the Niagara Falls area, is working to represent
John Bartolome, actually.
And John Bartolome, I'm sorry, working to represent them. How did the connection be made with someone like that? And what knowledge did you have of all of this prior to anything happening?
I've said publicly, and we'll say again, that several of the women approached me and wanted to meet with me as an attorney. I did not realize what they were coming in to see me about, and I held a meeting at my law office, and the first story I heard, I thought didn't sound good, but maybe we could work something out privately. But then as they continued to talk and then mentioned there was other women, I stopped them and told them that I was a personal friend of the Assemblyman's, and I felt I would be conflicted to be their attorney. So it came to me as an attorney. So I had a duty and an ethical duty to refer them to an attorney who could hear their story. So I basically, once I realized that it was rising to the level of a pretty serious situation, I referred them over to John Bartolome. I think Bartolome works with Destino and brought Destino in as an originally to make the announcement, but it seems like he's stepped up and is the lead counsel on it now.
You talked about some other candidates, Christy being one of them. She's prominent. She's on the air doing a show very similar to this on another station, and it comes from a political family. And you mentioned some other candidates. And what's going to happen now? Will this seat be empty until the governor makes an appointment or a special election?
Interesting. I think the governor has not made a decision as to whether he's doing a special election. There's a lot of people that feel that they become a distraction as the state's trying to do a budget. There's a lot of people, quite frankly, that feel that since the leaders kind of work the budget out, that in a short period of time, it doesn't hurt an area, not to have the members. Clearly, over a long period of time, it would. They're expensive. There's 11 of them around the state. I think he has to make a decision as to whether they have the distraction of the elections while they're trying to work out the budget, or he weighs that against what people will lose representation for a period of time. But you can see Tim Kennedy and Pat Gallivan have already stepped up to say that they're going to, cover. But I think that it's a close call, and the governor will make it. They're also very expensive special elections, and especially in the city, they're kind of determined by just the party leaders, and so it's not a lot of democracy with a small d. Now locally, I think the thing to watch will be if there is a special election. Under the Democratic Party rules, the committeemen make the endorsements. Now the last time this was an issue, because when the current chairman didn't have the votes in the committee, he just bypassed the rules and broke the rules and didn't hold meetings. I don't see how he could get away with it in this case. I would think there'd be a lawsuit if he tried, because the committees in this district are not aligned with him. They're aligned with Frank Max and with the other faction of the party. So, this again turns into that, typical smaller group controlling the party in that fight that's continuing.
Phil, you had a comment. We had talked yesterday about how the taxpayers may be footing the bill for some of these legal fees that are coming up. And
yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. Somebody who has personal bad behavior but is in office, or whether it's a police officer or an assemblyman, there's a fine line there between who's responsible financially. Is it a government? Is it the taxpayers? or is it the individual who exhibited the bad behavior?
Well, in the past, because they're in leadership positions and they're in supervisory positions, it would be the state that would have to indemnify. And that's just the current status of the law. Now, I suppose the state can try to say that his behavior was so beyond the range, but yet he was a supervisor, he was a boss, he was an elected leader, and representative of the state. And I think even in private situations, you're the owner of the station. So if something were to happen with John or Bob Kaczynski, I believe the station would probably have to be responsible too. So
in this
since
case,
you put them in a leadership position.
In this
so
case,
it's terrible that the taxpayer would be filled with this
It's
bill.
a double loss because you have a bad representative and you have a bad situation financially afterwards.
And as a matter of fact, the taxpayers may even have to pick up the bill for his legal representation, which is a shame. But it is a tragedy. This entire issue is a tragedy.
Very unfortunate on many levels, and certainly we wish everybody involved the best as we can move forward. All right, when Political Buzz continues, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. Will he be running for governor of the state of New York? That and more when we come back. Welcome back to Political Buzz. John DeShula here with you with Phil Arnott. Phil, you had one comment before we change topics.
Well, in situations like this, there's a tendency in today's media world to overreact to situations. It could be a representative who's done bad things, or someone with a gun who does a bad thing. Typically in society, bad things do happen. They're not the norm, but the tendency in today's media market is to overreact.
Well, it's the 24/7 news cycle. A lot of this stuff wouldn't have been covered as much.
That's correct.
Years past.
I think you have to put it in perspective. It's a bad thing. It's going to be taken care of. But leading into the future, you can't overreact and say, and you mentioned, maybe we should have more women serving. And, that's fine. But I would say we should have a better quality of person, whether it's male or female. Sure. That's the important thing. We should have a good representative taking control. And that's the important thing, because people need to be represented properly, the best that can be done.
But the people representing them are humans, and there's what happens.
That's the next
everywhere.
point.
There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be people with problems.
Exactly.
It's going to happen like it happens in every industry.
And people need to remember that anybody who they elect to office or put into a police car, or anybody who is serving the public, is not superhuman. Right. Everybody has problems. Everybody has quirks. The good thing to do would be to try and filter out the people with real problems.
I agree with that.
And as you mentioned, Steve, in a 24/7 news cycle, and in a world where technology is so mobile and so accessible,
available,
doing anything inappropriate anywhere is witnessed by so many people, and then it's spread out there. Well, speaking of controversial figures, Donald Trump, we all know Donald, the prominent developer in New York, and there he is with David DiPietro, has had meetings recently and is looking like he might actually throw his hat in the ring as a Republican candidate for governor of the state of New York, which, from our perspective, we've talked to Carl Palladino about that. He's always said, boy, I hope they put up a good candidate. He certainly has the money. He certainly has the name recognition. Going back to our previous conversation, he has done some things and continues to be outspoken. Steve, what's your take on this?
Well, at this point, I'm still a skeptic as to whether would really run, because we've seen this time and time and time again. He's very good at managing the Donald Trump brand. And being talked about as a potential president or a potential governor helps with the Donald Trump brand. I know Mr. Trump, have been in meetings with him. I don't really see him having the discipline to do a race like governor. I think he would be potentially he would end up with a lot of self-inflicted wounds. I also think when you're managing that Donald Trump brand, which is based upon he's the art of the deal and he's a winner and not a loser, that to risk a loss, which running against Andrew Cuomo, who is a very popular incumbent in a heavily Democratic state, would be an uphill battle for anyone. I don't think risking a loss makes sense for the Donald Trump brand, but yet I think thinking about it and having his name mentioned as a governor does help the Donald Trump brand. So my prediction is he doesn't run.
Yeah, it looked pretty. I mean, he has some
certainly
prominent.
could put a race together. There's no doubt.
And some prominent Western New Yorkers that Michael Caputo, David DiPietro. These are all political insiders, and they're involved with this. Very, very interesting. Phil, your comments.
I agree. I think that he has more advantage thinking about it than actually running. That being said, I don't think there's a candidate, certainly that we know of so far, that would be able to give Cuomo a run for his money better than Donald Trump. He's got the name recognition, and that is key to any election. People see a name and they associate something with the name. And he's got a reputation as a hard-charging business guy, successful. That goes a long way.
True.
I mean, you can't buy that.
I would agree that's true with the name recognition, but with the name recognition, he already starts with very high negatives. And I think that the Cuomo campaign would be in a very strong position to highlight those negatives compared to the government that we've been getting, which has been to me an exceptional government. So I agree, certainly somebody of that name recognition that would have the money. That's two of the things you need to make the race. But then again, George Pataki had none of those when he won the race. So sometimes when you're running against a person as large as an incumbent, that you better being the anti-incumbent, the anti-Cuomo.
Incumbents win probably 80 to 90% of all elections on every level.
Sure.
So it's an extremely tough battle. Is there anyone else that could give him a run for the money?
Well, I think that he's well positioned because of the job that he's done as governor. He's well positioned. But in today's 24/7 news cycle, anything can happen, and I'm sure he will run very hard, and I'm sure that he will act as if he's in a tough race regardless of who the person is. But no, I mean Trump has a name recognition, and the other thing he does need to deal with is I'm sure that Carl would put him to the same measure, that if he's not willing to have Dean Skelos or Brian Kolb removed as the leaders, that I think he would, still consider that conservative run. So a lot, and you notice that Trump said, well, the only way he'd do it is he'd have to have a completely unified Republican Party. That sounds like a caveat in and out, because Ed Cox is clearly for Rob Astorino. So you have the state chairman already for another candidate, with several establishment, Dean Skelos for another candidate. So you already see the disunity in the Republican Party. So he's saying that, I'll run when the letter M is stricken from the alphabet, because I don't know how they come together. But I think he's given himself an out, and it's more of a publicity
Well, he is
stunt.
covering himself. That's for sure.
And he's not showing
true.
up at the meeting next week in Albany, where if you were a candidate for governor, you think you'd be there.
Well, you just mentioned a name that I had never heard of before. And to speak to
Rob Astorino?
I didn't. Now,
It's been pretty much reported that he's the Westchester County executive. He's got he is considered a rising star in the party.
But that would be an enormous challenge to go up against Cuomo.
Now, of course, what he already said was he is not going to call for the ouster of Dean Skelos and Brian Kolb. So Astorino's already on a collision course with our regular contributor here, Carl Palladino. So. I think the fact that he said that he kind of gave himself an out tells me that this is more about the publicity of the Trump brand.
From a political point of view, talking about Cuomo, if he has aspirations beyond the governorship, does he need to win big in the state in order to have national implications later?
Well, it certainly doesn't hurt. Now, one thing that I know is, in knowing him well for a lot of years, he is so focused on the job of governor and so focused on bringing this state to the empire state that he knew and grew up with, that I really don't think he's thinking nationally right now. He's thinking about doing the job he's doing. He wants to be the best governor he can be. But clearly, the observers will say that the higher his win, the better that is if he does have national outlook for the future. In his view, that he's doing the job that he was elected to do, and he knows that there's a lot to do in that job of bringing, and that's why I think you see the attention on upstate, is he knows that there's two economies in this state, and will never be the great state that we once were, and being on the list of top tens that we always were until he fixed the tax problem. he sounded like you, Phil, in his State of the State. He's talking about the biggest problem that we have is the upstate property taxes, the upstate business taxes, the regulations, and he every year is chipping away at that. So he realizes there's two economies here. The downstate economy does very well. The upstate economy has been dying for 30 years, and that's why he's made it such a priority. He talked in his State of the Union about Buffalo and upstate as much as he talked about any other issue.
There's no question he's been up a lot, and if Donald does run, he's hopefully going to come up and we'll have him on the show. I'm going to change the topic real quick because it's something you had mentioned about Governor Cuomo. He had some national exposure in commercials that ran across various states and various platforms, and talking about New York State, obviously promoting the state.
Nothing compared to Governor Christie's national
But
ads.
that was just going to go to that because now Governor Christie in the state of New Jersey is being criticized for misuse of funds to come back from Hurricane Sandy.
He took Sandy funds to do the commercials, which is exactly the same thing that Cuomo did. He took Sandy funds, a certain amount, to promote the state from a business standpoint, and we've talked about that before. I thought that that
very
was...
he was in them very subtly, and it was a very small amount compared to what Christie did. What Christie also did is there was a bid that the agency had from a media group that he squashed,
right, I read
and
that.
brought in a highly political consulting firm that's tied to his campaigns, and not only had himself in it, had his entire family in it. He was the center of these commercials. Cuomo was seen in these commercials, was not the center of them. Whereas Christie talked in them, and his family appeared in them, and the commercial was really more about Chris Christie than the state.
If you're criticizing Christie for spending Sandy money to promote the state and himself in the process, you have to consider Cuomo doing the same thing. Maybe not in the same exact way, but in a different way, and we've talked about this before. He was promoting, Cuomo was promoting business in New York State, which is laughable because people around the country looking at that ad who are going to move a business are going to do the research and find out that we're still number 49 or 50.
They're going to do the research,
states.
and they're going to find out that we have the tax-free zones around the universities throughout New York State. They're going to do the research and find out there's now a zero corporate tax rate for manufacturing in upstate. In fact, I disagree. I've traveled this whole country, and I've had a lot of people ask me, based on those commercials, that they might be interested in looking at New York. I think it's been effective.
We are now in danger, and I think imminently, we are going to become the fourth largest state. And instead of, we've got California and Texas, and then us.
And
Florida is now taking over. And so we're losing population still under Cuomo. I mean, regulation has not
And I believe
changed.
that he's doing things like addressing that, like getting rid of the leave the state to die taxes, like the manufacturing zero taxes. Everything he's doing is combating that, including those commercials.
We'll talk more about politics with Steve Pidgeon and Phil Arno when Political Buzz continues right after this. Political Buzz, Sunday morning, 11 a.m., Thursday, 9 a.m. on WBBZ-TV. John DeShula here with you with Phil Arno. We only have about 3 minutes left. I do have to make mention, I don't want to get into an argument because we'll be here all day, but this week marks the 1 year of the New York SAFE Act, controversial gun legislation from Governor Cuomo, as long as we're talking about the governor. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about that because people are still not happy with that. We talked about Governor Christie from New Jersey in the last segment. The controversy there that he allegedly might have been involved. Might have been involved with keeping that traffic from going over the bridge at Fort Lee.
He has a serious problem.
Is he going to get over this?
And the reason why it's a serious problem is, one, the people were so close to him. It'd be like Mayor Brown saying, "Oh, I have 5,000 employees," and it was Steve Casey, his deputy mayor, who sent the email, and it was so close to his inner sanctum that was involved.
So how could he have not known?
That it's kind of difficult that he didn't know, or that he certainly sent the messages out that that's the way he wanted them to act. And now you have a second mayor coming out that didn't endorse him, and you could see that within hours they started taking vicious action against Jersey City. So now it looks as if you have somebody who is petty enough that will bring those political things and actually affect policy to a degree that, unlike is the norm. Obviously, there's a little bit of that always goes along, but not to the norm that they brought it. So I think the fact that it was so close to him, it was his main political team, and now there's other mayors that look like they may have affected. This is going to be an ongoing situation. How he handles this the next 6 months will determine whether he could be viable in that presidential race.
All right, Steve Pigeon, Phil Arno, thank you very much. One thing we can agree on, I don't think Chris Christie is going to be dining in Fort Lee, New Jersey anytime soon. But that said, we thank you for joining us here on Political Buzz here on WBBZ-TV. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.